I'm going to deal with the oculoplastic X files, and here I'll be taking you through some long and short cases which are for your PG exams. So first, we'll go through some case scenarios of ptosis. This is the first case, 4-year-old male who is having moderate ptosis with the faint or absent lid crease and a poor LPS action. Here is the second case with the 64-year-old male. He is having a severe ptosis with high and deep lid crease and a good LPS action. Here is the third scenario where a patient having severe bilateral ptosis with epicanthus inversus and shortened palpable aperture with a family history positive. So these are a few important case scenarios that you can get as a long case, and we'll discuss the features and the examination of these cases in detail now on. So whenever you get a case of ptosis, first of all, you should classify it whether it is congenital in onset or acquired. Then etiologically, whether it is myogenic, neurogenic, aponeurotic, or a mechanical ptosis. First and foremost, rule out pseudotosis. You may get a case of a vertical squint, like in this case of hypotropia of the left eye. When the patient is fixing with the right eye, there is an apparent ptosis in the left eye, but as soon as the patient starts fixing with the left eye, then the ptosis disappear and the other eye goes up. So rule out a vertical squint or a hypotropia in that eye. This is the whole proforma of the ptosis workup, and let's see them one by one. What is the importance of doing a visual acuity or pupillary assessment in a case of ptosis? So to rule out any amblyopia, which can be most likely an anisometropic amblyopia due to refractive error, or a pupillary involvement can be there in a neurogenic ptosis like a Horner syndrome or a third nerve palsy. You have to do a visual acuity and pupillary assessment. Then check for any abnormal head posture, like bilateral severe ptosis can have some chin up positions. Look for the position of the eyebrow, like frontalis overaction may be evident in cases of unilateral severe ptosis. Check for the lid crease. So lid crease is important to differentiate between the congenital and acquired ptosis. Like in congenital ptosis, you may have a faint or absent lid crease, while in acquired aponeurotic ptosis, it will be high and deep. Look for the margin to reflex distance. There are 3 MRDs, 1, 2, and 3. You have to measure the MRD 1, that is from the upper lid margin to the corneal light reflex. That will give you an amount of ptosis. MRD2 is from the lower lid margin to the corneal light reflex. That you can also mention in your ptosis workup. MRD3 you don't have to mention. I'm sorry. So depending upon the amount of ptosis, it can be divided into mild, moderate, and severe categories. Always look for a compensatory lid retraction in the other eye. And this may be there in a case of a severe unilateral ptosis because of the Haring's law of equal innervation. The other eye may go up, and as soon as you close or lift up the involved eye, this compensatory lid retraction will disappear. LPS excursion is measured by putting the scale in the patient looking in the extreme down gaze, and then ask him to look into the extreme up gaze, and whole of the procedure is done by blocking the frontalis. You have to block it with your thumb and then do the LPS action measurement. So it can be classified as good, fair, and poor. Poor we say when it is less than 4 mm, fair is 5 to 7 mm, and more than 8 mm is a good LPS action. This is called as a Berkey's method. In infants or children who are not cooperative for this Berkey's method, you can just do an ELIF test. So evert the upper eyelid, and as the child looks down, it will revert back on its own spontaneously if the LPS action is good. Also, indirectly, you can assess it by checking the lid crease. If it is a prominent lid crease, then it means that the LPS action is good. Vertical tarsal height you can measure in cases of mild ptosis where you're planning for a Fasanella servant surgery. Always look for lid lag. That is, when you ask the patient to look down, check for the movement of the eyelid, whether it is following the eyeball or not. So lid lag is a very characteristic feature of a congenital ptosis. Bell's phenomena is important when you're planning the surgery, and you have to always grade it, that whether it is a good Bell's, fair Bell's, and poor Bell's. So if you are seeing less than 1/3 of the cornea when the patient is closing the eyeball, then it is called as good Bell's. Poor is when more than half of the cornea is visible. Reverse Bell is upward and inward rolling of the eyeball, and inverse is downward and inward rolling of the eyeball. Always ask the patient to move the jaw and check for any synkinetic movement of the eyelid, that is called as Marcus Gunn jaw winking ptosis. Now it's very important to look for the ocular movements. Like in this case, when you ask the patient to look up in abducted eye, this eye is going up, but this is not. So this is suggestive of an underaction of the superior rectus muscle. So this happens usually in double elevator palsies. Always do a workup for dry eye by doing a tear film evaluation and check for corneal sensation. Whenever in doubt for an acquired ptosis, check for old photographs. You must do some important tests whenever required, like ISPEC test in myasthenia gravis and phenylephrine test when you have a mild ptosis. Coming to the next long case, that is proptosis. First case scenario, it's a 45-year-old male who is having a bilateral axial proptosis, periorbital edema, and restricted ocular motility. There is lateral flare, and on imaging, you can see enlarged belly with the sparing of tendons. So this is a sure case of a thyroid ophthalmopathy, and in the workup, you must include all the lid signs. There are 25, but at least 10 you should know and do include in your workup. That is lid retraction, lid lag in down gaze, absence of forehead crease in up gaze, etc. To check for any activity in the thyroid eye disease, look for any congestion near the insertion of recti muscles. Do a retropulsion test. If you found any resistance to retropulsion, then it's called as positive retropulsion test. To rule out any restrictive myopathy, check for ocular movements, and always do a systemic examination to check for any neck swelling and check for fine tremors that can be associated in hyperthyroidism. Now, you can get a case of a plexiform neurofibroma like this case, and they may have an S-shaped eyelid associated with the ipsilateral facial asymmetry. There may be a dysplastic sphenoid, greater wing of the sphenoid, which can lead to a transmitted pulsation causing a pulsatile proptosis. Always do a detailed systemic examination. Here you can see cafe au lait spots, subcutaneous nodules. These may be associated with plexiform neurofibroma. If you get a case of an adult who is complaining of pulsatile proptosis after head injury, and on examination you saw the dilated episcleral veins, that is the corkscrew vessels, and increased intraocular pressure associated with the radiographic finding of dilated superior ophthalmic vein. So this is a case of a caroticocavernous fistula. In case of a positional or intermittent proptosis, like this patient complaining of proptosis only on bending forward, which resolves on lying supine. So you have to measure the proptosis by performing a Valsalva maneuver in such cases, and these are usually caused by orbital varices. Now, if you get a case of proptosis, which is abaxial in nature, and the mass is located in the lacrimal gland fossa, you have to look for some important signs, like if there is any tenderness or bony margin irregularity. If it is associated with signs of inflammation, tenderness, and irregularity of the bony ring, it is likely to be adenoid cystic carcinoma, or in the other case, it can be a pleomorphic adenoma in absence of all these features. If you have a case of a child with axial proptosis and vision loss, you must rule out optic nerve glioma. While optic nerve meningioma will present in slightly later age, and here the proptosis will appear first and it will be followed by vision loss. And characteristic radiographic finding you must know is a tram track appearance in meningioma and a fusiform appearance in optic nerve glioma. Now do some important examination tests in the OPD, like Worm's view, that is when you look from downwards, you can see the difference between the apex of the cornea of the two eyes. The proptotic eye will appear more prominent, while the Navziger's view or the bird's eye view, the examiner have to stand behind the patient and look from above downwards. Here, normally you don't see the eyeball or the apex of the cornea because of the prominent supraorbital rim. In case of proptosis, it will appear prominent. And how to measure the proptosis? It is by most common method is the Hertel's exophthalmometer. So you put the Hertel's exophthalmometer on the lateral orbital rim and measure the distance from here to the apex of cornea, and always keep the base constant for subsequent reading for comparison. Other exophthalmometers name you should be aware of is Lued's exophthalmometer, where the notch is placed on the lateral orbital rim. If the lateral orbital rim is not intact, you must know about Nogle's exophthalmometer, which can be placed over the superior and inferior rim. Now, another method is a radiographic method, where you draw an imaginary line onto the interzygomatic plane. Interzygomatic line is drawn in the mid-axial CT scan, and you draw two perpendiculars from the apex of the cornea falling onto this line and measure the proptosis. Whenever there is a case of abaxial proptosis, always measure dystropia by two-ruler method. And here you measure the distance from the center of the nose to the center of the pupil. Always rule out pseudoproptosis in cases of ipsilateral eyelid retraction, contralateral inophthalmos, ipsilateral biophthalmos or high myopia, or cases of shallow orbits in craniosynostosis. So whenever you get a case of axial proptosis, it's likely to be either thyroid or intraconal lesion. Whenever you get abaxial proptosis, it's likely to be an extraconal lesion. And depending upon the location of the tumor, the dystropia occurs in the opposite direction. Like if the patient is having subperiosteal hematoma, it will be downward dystropia. The patient is having ethmoid tumor or ethmoid mucocele, it will be lateral or horizontal dystropia. Examiner may ask you the differentials for unilateral proptosis, which is acute in onset in a child. So remember, if it is associated with fever, URTI, sinusitis, it's likely to be cellulitis. If it is associated with history of trauma, likely to be hematoma. If there is an increase in proptosis with the URTI, and it can be a sudden expansion or chocolate cyst formation in the lymphangioma. If the general condition of the child is poor, anemic, he is lethargic, and there is a rapidly progressive proptosis, it could be a leukemic infiltrate. So leukemic infiltrate or systemic metastasis, systemic malignancy will give rise to eventually a bilateral proptosis. So coming on to some short cases. This Dr. Feiruz has already discussed. I'll not go into the details. This is an upper lid sebaceous gland carcinoma, and this is a lower lid basal cell carcinoma, rodent ulcer. So the third case, this is a lady presenting with watering and foreign body sensation. And here you can see that the lid margin is inverted and the lashes are rubbing onto the cornea. So this is a lower lid senile entropion. Here you have to do certain tests like assessment of the medial canthal laxity by pulling the lid laterally. And if the punctum is pulled till the medial limbus, it is called as lax medial canthus. Lateral canthus laxity, it can be depicted by rounding of the lateral canthus and pulling of the lateral canthus till the lateral limbus. Then you have to judge the orbicularis muscle tone by snapback test. Usually when you pull the lid, it will go immediately back within a one blink. If it is taking time, like one or more blink, then it's said that the muscle tone is lax. Distraction test, if you can pinch the lid away from the globe by more than 8 mm, it is said to be positive. Then you have to differentiate between senile and cicatricial entropions. In cicatricial entropion, it will be involving mostly the upper eyelid with the thickening of the tarsus, and there will be signs of cicatrization like conjunctivalization of cornea will be there, severe dry eye will be there, metaplastic eyelashes will be there. Then coming to ectropion, it may be again a senile or cicatricial ectropion. Senile ectropion will have similar characteristic as I described for the senile entropion. Here there is a history of trauma followed by a scarring of the lower eyelid, which is pulling the eyelid downward. So this is a case of a cicatricial ectropion. Now, paralytic ectropion may follow a facial nerve palsy. Here you have to look for the absence of forehead wrinkles, then incomplete closure of the eyelid, then deviation of the angle of mouth. So all these features favors a facial nerve palsy. In case of a watering with presence of erythema and swelling just below the medial canthal region, this is a case of most likely an acute dacryocystitis due to chronic nasolacrimal duct obstruction. And to check for the nasolacrimal duct obstruction, the test you have to perform in OPD is the Roplas. And if you get a clear mucoid or mucopurulent regurgitant on Roplas test, it is diagnostic of an LDO. In case if you don't get Roplas positive and there is a cystic swelling that does not disappear on pressure over the lacrimal sac region, then this is suggestive of ancystic mucocele. That can also come as a short case.
With all due to respect, I request Dr. Maya to please wrap up the session.
Right. So this is the last case.
Okay,
this is the last case. So
yes, ma'am, please sum up within 30 minutes.
Fine. So this, you can get a contracted socket case also, and you have to do a complete socket workup by measurement of the depth of the fornices and volume of the socket, and label it as according to the Gopal Krishna classification.